A blizzard buries Denver in white. Wind shrieks down a forgotten, frozen alley. A canine German shepherd named Zeus plants himself in the snow. He has found them. A 5-year-old boy, Leo, shielding his baby sister, Mia, with his own failing body heat. Their older sister, only 10, is running back with a stolen loaf of bread. But the man she is running from is hunting. Behind a predator's smile is not a plan for custody. It's a plan to sell them. He sees an asset, not a family. A grieving canine officer, Mark, will give them a home, but a school's registration list is more than a formality. It's a map. And when Zeus stands guard at a safe house door, the room will shift from a sanctuary to a battleground, from a chase to a final stand. What happens next will make you believe in guardian angels, four-legged protectors, and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe to the Rescue Relay now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The city of Denver was a ghost, suffocated by a blizzard that had descended from the Rockies like an avalanche of cold. It was a vicious, unforgiving storm, the kind that silenced a metropolis, burying streets and hope under a heavy shroud of white. Wind howled through the steel canyons of downtown, a high-pitched shriek that sounded almost human. Officer Mark Brennan, 32 years old, felt the vibration of it through the steering wheel of his K9 patrol unit. He was parked in the shadow of a near-derelict industrial park, the heater of the SUV blasting a stream of warm air that felt like a localized miracle against the frozen world outside. Mark was a man built for his uniform, solid, broad-shouldered, with a presence that usually commanded respect. But his face, sharp and defined, was chiseled by a quiet grief that had settled into his features 2 years ago and never left. His eyes, a slate gray that perfectly matched the storm, scanned the swirling snow with a weary professionalism. The silence inside his car was as heavy as the snow outside. It was the same silence that had filled his suburban home ever since the accident. The silence he now filled with double shifts and the steady breathing presence of the partner beside him. That partner, Zeus, was a 90-pound shadow of professional focus. A sable German shepherd, Zeus was at the peak of his K9 career, a disciplined, intelligent animal whose loyalty to Mark was absolute. He sat in his custom-fitted bay, alert, his dark eyes missing nothing, his breath fogging the reinforced barrier. His ears, large and erect, twitched, processing sounds Mark couldn't hope to hear. Mark often thought Zeus was the only thing keeping him anchored to the present. The dog was a living, breathing responsibility, a shield against the ghosts of his past. Suddenly, Zeus's demeanor changed. It wasn't a bark. It was a low, insistent whine, a sound of profound distress that cut through the engine's hum. He shifted, his claws scraping the kennel as he pushed his nose toward the partition. "What is it, boy?" Mark murmured, his hand instinctively going to the console. Zeus whined again, louder this time, and fixed his gaze on a narrow, forgotten alley between two warehouses. It was a dead end, a place filled with nothing but frozen dumpsters and urban decay. Okay, I hear you." Mark trusted the dog's instincts implicitly. Zeus had saved his life twice. He'd certainly earned the right to be heard. Mark flipped on his overheads, the red and blue lights instantly transforming the snow into a chaotic swirl of color. He pulled the vehicle to the mouth of the alley, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, and stepped out. The cold was a physical blow. It punched the air from his lungs and instantly turned his breath to ice. The wind tore at his hat, stinging his face with frozen needles. "Zeus! Voron! Forward!" He released the door mechanism, and Zeus bounded out, instantly on task, nose to the ground, pulling Mark deeper into the suffocating darkness. The alley was a wind tunnel, the shrieking of the storm amplified between the brick walls. "Zeus, langsam, slow," Mark commanded, his voice tight, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky cone through the maelstrom. The alley was choked with drifts, and the dumpsters looked like sleeping white giants. He saw it a second after Zeus did. The dog stopped dead, his hackles rising, but he didn't bark. He looked back at Mark, a look of confusion and urgency. Mark's beam landed on a heap of snow-covered trash, and then he saw it move. It wasn't trash. It was a small human form, hunched over, rocking. "Denver PD!" Mark shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Is anyone there?" He got closer, wading through knee-deep snow, his heart hammering against his tactical vest. The form was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old, a scrawny child with a face so pale and smudged with grime it looked like bruised porcelain. He was wearing a threadbare shirt and jeans, a flimsy, wet jacket draped uselessly over him. His small body was shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. But he wasn't alone. He was hunched over, using his own small, freezing body as a shield for a bundle in his lap. He was whispering, "It's okay. It's okay. Wake up." "Oh my God," Mark breathed, the words stolen by the wind. He fell into his knees in the snow, the flashlight illuminating the horrific scene. The boy, Leo, looked up. His eyes were ancient, filled not just with terror, but with a defiant, protective rage that didn't belong in a child's face. He had stopped crying. The tears were frozen tracks on his cheeks. Don't hurt her," he whimpered, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. And the bundle in his lap stirred. It was a baby. A tiny girl, perhaps 1 year old, wrapped in a thin, wet blanket. Her name, he would later learn, was Mia. Her skin was a waxy, translucent white, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. She wasn't crying, she was long past it. She was terrifyingly still. The professional part of Mark's brain took over, a checklist of trauma and procedure, hypothermia, severe, shock, both. He ripped his radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is 7K9. I have 2 juvenile victims. Unresponsive, alley at 41st and Brighton. I need a bus. Expedite. Roll EMS now." His voice was gravel, stripped of all emotion. But the man inside was screaming. The man who remembered holding his own daughter's hand in a hospital room. The man who knew what it felt like to watch the cold creep in. "Kid, Leo, my name is Mark." He stripped off his thick, insulated gloves, his bare hands instantly burning in the cold. He touched the boy's shoulder. Leo flinched, a movement of pure animal terror. "I'm here to help. I'm getting you warm." He looked at Mia, her chest barely moving. He didn't have time. Procedure be damned. Mark tore open the zippers of his own heavy-duty patrol jacket, the one thing protecting him from the elements. "Give her to me." Leo clutched the bundle tighter. "No, you'll take her." "No, son. I'm putting her in here, where it's warm. Look." He held the jacket open. "We share, both of you." He didn't wait for permission. He gently, firmly scooped the icy, terrifyingly light form of Mia from Leo's arms. She felt like a doll made of ice. He tucked her against his chest, against the warmth of his vest and his undershirt, zipping the jacket up to trap the heat. Then, with his other arm, he grabbed Leo, pulling the boy's shaking body against his side, trying to envelop both of them. Leo fought for a second. Then, feeling the first wave of warmth he'd known in days, he simply collapsed, his small body going limp against the policeman's side. Zeus stood guard at the mouth of the alley, a silent, furry sentinel, ensuring nothing else came for them. Mark huddled against the brick wall, a strange, desperate trinity shielding themselves from the storm. He could feel the faint, fragile flutter of Mia's breath against his chest. He could feel the violent shiver of Leo's body pressed against his ribs. He heard the distant, beautiful wail of sirens growing closer, a lifeline in the howling white dark. He pressed his face into Leo's wet hair, whispering words he wasn't sure they could hear, words that were as much for him as for them. "It's okay. I've got you. You're safe now. I've got you." He held them, a living shield against the night, not yet knowing that this single act, this discovery in the storm, was the beginning of a war. The alley was no longer dark. It was a pulsating cathedral of red and blue light. The approaching sirens, now deafening, bounced off the brick, merging with the howl of the storm. Officer Mark Brennan remained a statue of determined warmth, a living cocoon on his knees in the filth and snow. He felt the infinitesimal flutter of Mia's breath against his chest, a rhythm so fragile it felt like a butterfly's wing. Leo's shivering had subsided into a limp, exhausted weight against his side. "They're almost here," Mark whispered, as much to himself as to the children. "Just hold on. Just hold on." Zeus stood, a rigid sentinel, his body positioned between Mark and the mouth of the alley, a low growl rumbling in his chest at the approaching strangers. "Zeus, Ruhig, quiet," Mark commanded, his voice tight. But the growl wasn't for the sirens. It was for the new sound, the one Mark hadn't processed, the frantic, slipping footsteps of someone running, someone small. A figure burst through the curtain of flashing light, a whirlwind of desperation. "No! Get away from them!" It was a shriek, not of a child, but of a cornered animal. Mark looked up, and his heart, already overloaded, seemed to stop. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 10, but her face was a hardened, ancient mask of fury and terror. Her name, he would soon learn, was Sarah. She was skeletal, a small, wiry thing swimming in a man's torn parka, her matted, dishwater blonde hair sticking to her face in frozen clumps. Her skin was a raw, chapped white, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were a piercing icy gray wide with abject panic. In one frozen red hand, she clutched a plastic-wrapped loaf of bread. "I said get away!" she screamed again. She saw the uniform, the badge glistening, the massive police dog, and her two siblings being held by the man who represented everything that had ever torn her life apart. She dropped the bread, a treasure she had likely risked everything to steal, and launched herself forward, her small chapped fists raised. "You can't have them! He's a cop, Leo! Run!" "Whoa, easy! I'm helping them!" Mark yelled, instinctively shielding the two smaller children with his shoulder. He couldn't move, couldn't stand, not without exposing Mia to the lethal cold. "Liar!" Sarah shrieked, skidding to a halt just out of his reach. She was panting, half wild. "You're taking them, aren't you? You're taking them to the home. You're going to split us up. I won't let you." She was sobbing now, frustrated, terrified tears freezing on her face. "He's not breathing. You killed him." No, he's breathing. They're just cold, honey. So cold." Mark tried to keep his voice calm, the way he would talk down a jumper, but his heart was breaking. This 10-year-old girl was their mother. She was their protector, and in her eyes, he was the monster. Two paramedics, their faces grim and professional, sprinted into the alley, their heavy kits banging against their legs. The first one, a woman with a kind, no-nonsense face named Maria, took in the scene in a fraction of a second. One cop, two hypothermic victims, one feral-looking girl, and one very large K9. "Officer, what do we have?" she called, her voice clear over the wind. "Two juveniles, severe hypothermia," Mark reported, his professional mask slipping back into place. "Male, approx 5, female, approx 1. Female's breathing is shallow, very shallow. I've had them inside my jacket for maybe 5 minutes." "And her?" Maria asked, nodding at Sarah, who was vibrating with rage. "She's with them," Mark said simply. Get the gurney, Johnson," Maria snapped. She knelt in the snow opposite Mark. "Okay, officer. On 3, I need you to open that jacket and give me the girl first. We have a thermal wrap ready." The unzipping of the jacket felt like a violation, like opening an airlock in space. A plume of steam, Mark's body heat, escaped into the night. He carefully, agonizingly transferred Mia's tiny, inert form into the paramedic's waiting hands. "No! MIA! Don't touch her!" Sarah lunged forward, and Zeus, seeing the movement as a threat to his handler, moved with lightning speed, placing himself between Sarah and Mark, his teeth bared in a silent, terrifying warning. "Zeus! 9! No! Plots! Down!" Mark roared. The dog instantly dropped to a downstay, but his eyes never left Sarah. Sarah froze, her terror of the dog momentarily eclipsing her terror of the paramedics. "He won't hurt you," Mark said, his voice strained as he and the other paramedic, Johnson, now worked to lift Leo. "He's protecting me, just like you were protecting them." That one sentence seemed to land. Sarah's gaze flickered from the dog to Mark. She didn't lower her fists, but the animal panic in her eyes subsided, replaced by a calculating, suspicious glare. She watched them strap Mia and Leo to the gurney, swaddling them in foil and blankets. Where are they going?" she asked, her voice small and rough. "Denver General," Maria said, already moving backward, pulling the gurney. "They're alive, kid, but we gotta go. Now." Sarah looked at the ambulance, then at Mark, then at the empty snow where her siblings had been. She was alone again. Mark saw the devastating realization hit her. He saw the fight drain away, leaving a 10-year-old girl, freezing to death, clutching a stolen loaf of bread. He zipped his jacket up, the cold instantly biting at his chest. "I'm going too," he said, standing up, his legs aching from the cold. "You're coming with me." "No," she spat. "I'm not leaving them. You'll drive away." "The ambulance is full," Mark said, pointing. You ride with me. We follow right behind them. I promise." He held out his hand. She stared at it, her lip trembling. I'm not going to Foster," she whispered, the words barely audible. "We stay together." I will do everything I can," Mark said, the only promise he could truthfully make. "Now, get in the car. It's warm." He pointed to his K9 unit, the engine still running. She looked at the ambulance, now pulling out of the alley. She couldn't lose it. She made a decision. With one last hateful look at Mark, she bolted, not away but toward his SUV, yanking the back door open and climbing in. As far from him as she could get. Mark nodded to the paramedics. "Go, we're right behind you." He gave Zeus the command to load in, and the dog jumped into his kennel. Mark got in the driver's seat, the storm, the sirens, and the cries of the children swirling in his head. He looked in the rearview mirror. Sarah was a small, dark shape in the back, her face pressed against the glass, watching the ambulance's lights disappear. The only sound in the car was the click of the radio, the howl of the wind, and the quiet, ragged sobs of a 10-year-old girl whose entire world had just collapsed. The emergency bay at Denver General was a stark, violent contrast to the alley. Where the alley was dark and muffled by snow, the ER was a world of blinding fluorescent light, polished linoleum, and noise. The sound of the ambulance doors bursting open was followed by a cacophony of shouts, beeping machinery, and the squeak of the gurney's wheels moving far too fast. "PITU transfer, 1-year-old female, severe hypothermia, non-responsive," Maria the paramedic shouted, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Second pediatric, 5-year-old male, moderate hypothermia, responsive but lethargic." Officer Mark Brennan was a step behind them, a dark uniformed shadow in the sterile white hall. He had left Zeus in the running, locked K9 unit, a breach of protocol that gnawed at him, but he had no choice. His human partners were now inside. Sarah had scrambled out of the SUV before he'd even brought it to a full stop, her small, ragged form moving like a feral cat, her eyes locked on the gurney that held her siblings. She was a tiny, filthy ghost in this temple of medicine, and the nurses and orderlies, accustomed to the city's worst, still found their eyes lingering on her. She was a specter of neglect, her face set in a mask of rigid, terrified defiance. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just watched, her body vibrating, ready to bolt or bite. "Sir, you need to stay here." A triage nurse, a large woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, put a hand on Mark's arm. "They're taking them to the pediatric trauma bay. Dr. Aris is on it. You can wait in the family area." "I'm the responding officer," Mark said, his voice clipped. You need to wait," the nurse said, not unkindly. "And she," the nurse nodded towards Sarah, who was trying to press herself into a corner, "can come with me. We'll get her some hot cocoa and—" "No!" The shriek was so sudden and raw, it silenced the immediate area. Sarah's head snapped up. "I'm not going anywhere. I stay with them. You can't make me." Mark stepped in, his voice low and steady. "It's okay, nurse." "Davis," she supplied. "Nurse Davis, she's with me. We'll wait together. Just tell Dr. Aris they're not alone." His words were for the nurse, but his eyes were on Sarah. He saw her register the phrase, "not alone." It didn't calm her, but it momentarily confused her, which was the next best thing. Nurse Davis nodded, her expression softening with a flicker of understanding, and bustled back to the chaos. The waiting room was its own special kind of purgatory. The storm had paralyzed the city, so it was blessedly empty, save for Mark and Sarah. The air smelled of stale coffee and antiseptic. A television murmured a 24-hour news report about the blizzard. Mark sat on a hard plastic chair. Sarah refused. She stood, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes fixed on the double doors her siblings had disappeared through. She was still clutching the stolen loaf of bread, her frozen knuckles, white around it. You should eat that," Mark said gently, gesturing to the bread. She glared at him, clutching it tighter, as if he meant to take it from her. He sighed and ran a hand over his face, the stubble on his jaw scraping his palm. He felt the cold seep out of him, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. He had to make the call. Pulling out his radio, he switched to a private channel. "Dispatch 7K9. Be advised, my unit is secure at Denver General. I am 10 Nang at station location with the children. I need a call put into CPS. We have a 1091V child abuse neglect situation. That call set in motion a machine, and the first cog of that machine arrived 45 minutes later. His name was Mr. Henderson. He was a man in his late 50s, a man who looked like he had been worn down to a nub by the very system he represented. His cheap suit was wrinkled, his thinning gray hair was damp with melted snow, and a coffee stain decorated his tie like a badge of exhaustion. He carried a battered briefcase and the aura of profound cynicism. He didn't introduce himself to Sarah. He walked directly to Mark, his eyes scanning the uniform. "Officer Brennan? Henderson, Department of Child Services. My dispatcher said you called in the 91V. These the kids?" He gestured vaguely toward the trauma bay doors. "They're inside," Mark said, standing up, his physical presence easily dwarfing the social worker. 1-year-old female, Mia. 5-year-old male, Leo. The girl, Sarah, 10, is right here. Henderson finally looked at Sarah, his gaze clinical and assessing. He offered a weak, practiced smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Hello, Sarah. I'm Mr. Henderson. I'm here to help." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She had seen men like this before, the men who came with clipboards after the neighbors complained, the men who talked in soft voices before they took things away. "We're fine," she whispered, her voice a low rasp. We were just waiting for our mom." It was a brave lie, but a foolish one. Henderson sighed, his patience already gone. "Look, kid, let's not. Your mother is deceased. We have the coroner's report. Now, I need to—" "Don't you say that," Sarah exploded, lunging off the wall. "She's not. She's just sick." "Sarah," Henderson said, his voice flat. "She was pronounced DOA at 14:30. Overdose. Now, I have to place you and your siblings in emergency care. It's late, so for tonight, you'll probably go to the youth shelter, and your brother and sister, being younger, will go to a receiving home. We'll try to sort it out in the morning." "No!" Sarah's voice broke. This was it. The nightmare. The one thing she had sacrificed everything to prevent. "No! We stay together! You can't! You can't!" She tried to run, to get back to the trauma bay, to physically bar the door. Mr. Henderson just looked tired. He put a hand out, not to grab her, but to bishkisar blasisar. "Kid, you don't have a choice." Mark had seen enough. He had seen the terror in the alley, and he was seeing it again now. But this time, the monster wasn't the cold. It was the procedure. It was the tired man in the cheap suit. Something inside Mark, something that had been frozen and dead for 2 years, finally broke. He put his own body between Henderson and Sarah. "Wait," Henderson looked at Mark, annoyed. "Officer, with respect, this is my case now. I need to process the child." "She's not a case," Mark said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's a 10-year-old girl who just watched her siblings nearly freeze to death, and you're not splitting them up." Henderson actually scoffed. "Oh, really? And what's your solution, officer? You gonna adopt them? The state is overloaded. The storm is shutting everything down. This is the best I can do. The shelter is warm, and it's safe." "They're not going," Mark said. The words were out before he had fully processed them. They hung in the sterile air, heavy and irreversible. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said they're not going. Not to a shelter, not to separate homes." Mark took a deep breath. He could feel his career, his quiet, empty life, his sanity, all of it teetering on a precipig. They're coming with me." This time, Henderson was speechless. He stared at Mark as if he'd grown a second head. "Brennan, are you insane? You can't. That's not. There's liability, paperwork. You're a K-9 cop, for God's sake, not a foster parent. You are not certified." "Then certify me," Mark said, his gaze unflinching. "I'm a sworn officer. I've been background checked to hell and back. I have a house. It's warm. It's safe. I am the rescuing officer, and I am invoking my right to request emergency temporary custody. You need a safe place for them? It's my home. Call a judge. Call my watch commander. I'll wait." The silence in the waiting room was absolute. Even the TV news seemed to go quiet. Sarah had stopped crying. She was staring at Mark, her mouth open, her mind completely unable to process what was happening. This man, this cop, this enemy was fighting for her. He was fighting the other man. Just then, the trauma bay doors opened. A man in blue scrubs, his hair graying at the temples, walked out. He looked exhausted but kind. Family of... He looked at the chart. The children from the alley? I'm Officer Brennan, Mark said, not taking his eyes off Henderson. This is their sister, Sarah. How are they, Dr. Aris, the doctor said. Mia, the baby, is in very critical condition. We've stabilized her, but the pneumonia is severe. We're moving her to the pediatric ICU. She's a fighter, but it's going to be tough. He then looked at Sarah, his gaze softening. Your brother Leo is doing much better. He's warming up. He's scared. He's asking for you. We'll have him in a pediatric room on the 3rd floor in an hour. Can I... Sarah's voice was a tiny thread. Can I see him? Absolutely, Dr. Aris said. As soon as he's settled. He looked at Mark. They're going to be here a while. We know, Mark said. He turned back to Henderson, who was now rubbing his temples, a man defeated not by force, but by sheer, irrational stubbornness. You realize what you're doing, Brennan? Henderson sighed, pulling out his phone. You're responsible for all of it. The moment they walk out of this hospital, they are your problem. They're not a problem, Mark said, his voice raw. He looked down at Sarah, who was still staring at him, her gray eyes filled with a terrifying, agonizing flicker of something he hadn't seen before. It wasn't trust, but it wasn't hate. It was confusion. They're children, Henderson grunted. Yeah, well, you just inherited 3. I've got to go wake up a judge. Don't go anywhere. He trudged off, already dialing, a man about to move a mountain of paperwork against his will. Mark finally let out the breath he'd been holding. He looked at Sarah. She was still frozen, still clutching the bread. He gently, very gently, touched her shoulder. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. I told you I'd do everything I can, he whispered. The hours that followed were a surreal, fluorescent-lit blur. The hospital, with its sterile beeps and antiseptic smell, operated in a time zone all its own. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, had disappeared with his phone, presumably to wake up a judge, leaving Officer Mark Brennan and Sarah in the purgatory of the pediatric waiting room. Sarah had not sat down. She remained posted by the wall, a small, rigid sentinel, her body a taut wire of suspicion. The stolen bread was still clutched in her hand, a pathetic, doughy talisman against the forces that had stolen her world. She had, however, finally given in to the nurse's earlier offer, not of cocoa, but of a hospital-issued surgical scrub top and pants. The blue cotton, stiff and many sizes too large, swallowed her, making her look even smaller, a tiny refugee adrift in a sea of blue. Mark, meanwhile, felt the agonizing pull of his split responsibilities. His K9 unit was still locked and running outside the ER bay, and Zeus, his partner, had been confined for hours. He made a quick, apologetic call to dispatch, requesting a non-emergency welfare check on his own vehicle, feeling absurd as he did so. But he couldn't leave Sarah. He couldn't leave the hospital. When Dr. Aris finally reappeared, his kind, tired face offered a fragile sliver of hope. We got him settled, he said, directing his words to Sarah. Your brother Leo, he's in room 314. He's warm, he's scared, and he's been asking for Sawi. Sarah's head snapped up. For the first time, the icy gray of her eyes flickered with something other than terror. I can... You can, Dr. Aris nodded. He's right down this hall. Sarah didn't walk. She bolted. She moved like a greyhound, her oversized scrub pants flapping, and disappeared down the corridor. Mark started to follow, but Dr. Aris put a gentle hand on his arm. Officer, a word. Mark stopped. Mia, the baby, she's holding on. Just, the pneumonia is overwhelming. We've got her on a ventilator and a warming bypass. It's a minute-by-minute fight. I need you to understand that. Mark nodded, the professional mask settling back onto his face. I understand, Doctor. Thank you. And the boy, Dr. Aris continued, lowering his voice. He keeps asking for the man in the coat. He's terrified of the staff, but I think he's asking for you. You got them warm. Mark felt a strange, unwelcome pressure behind his eyes. He wasn't a man. He was a coat. He was a function of warmth. He found Sarah not in the room, but in the bed. She had climbed over the railing of the pediatric crib bed and was curled in a tight ball around Leo, who was now wearing his own set of blue scrubs. Leo was awake, his face cleaner but still bruised-looking, and he had his arms locked around Sarah's neck. They were a single, intertwined knot of fear. When Mark stepped into the doorway, Leo tensed, his eyes going wide. Sarah, feeling his reaction, whispered something fierce in his ear. "It's okay," she hissed, her voice loud enough for Mark to hear. He's the one. The cop. He yelled at the other man." She had translated his bureaucratic fight into her own language. Yelling. Mark leaned against the doorframe, his uniform suddenly feeling too large, too loud in this small, quiet room. He had never felt more like an intruder. Their strange tableau was broken by the return of Mr. Henderson, who looked, if possible, even more defeated. "Well, Brennan," he sighed, not even bothering to look at the children, "congratulations. You just pulled a miracle or an act of profound stupidity. I'm not sure which." He thrust a sheaf of carbon-copied papers at Mark. "Emergency 72-hour judicial hold, granted by Judge Torres, who was, quote, moved by the spirit of the storm. You are now the temporary legal guardian of Sarah, Leo, and Mia, last name unknown. You are financially and legally responsible for them. The hospital is releasing the boy into your custody. The girl," he gestured at the ceiling, toward the PICU, "is a ward of the state, assigned to your care. You have medical proxy, God help you." And with that, he was gone, a man washing his hands of an impossible situation. Mark looked at the papers, at the official damning signature. He had done it. The drive was silent. The city, under 3 feet of snow, was utterly quiet. The blizzard had broken, leaving behind a frozen, crystalline world that sparkled under the streetlights. Mark had retrieved Zeus, who was vibrating with pent-up energy, and settled him back in his kennel. Sarah and Leo, now dressed in donated coats from the hospital's charity closet, were in the back seat. They had never been in a car this clean, this warm. They sat rigid, their hands in their laps, watching the snow-covered houses of Mark's quiet suburban neighborhood slide by. This was a world they had only seen on television. Mark's house was a simple, single-story brick rancher on a street called Quiet Hill. It was the house he and his wife, Emily, had bought 5 years ago. It was the house that had been filled with laughter, and then it was just a house. It was a house of crushing, meticulous order, a home where grief had been tidied up, scrubbed clean, and put away, but had never truly left. He pulled into the garage, the automatic door humming, and the silence that followed was absolute. "Okay," he said, his voice sounding abrasive and loud in the enclosed space. We're home." He led them through the utility room into the kitchen. The house was warm. It smelled faintly of coffee and the lemon polish he used on the hardwood floors. Sarah and Leo stopped dead on the doormat. They stared at the clean, polished floor, at the stainless steel refrigerator, at the soft, plush rug in the living room beyond. They looked down at their own wet, dirty, hospital-issued shoes. You can come in," Mark said, his voice faltering. He suddenly saw his house through their eyes. It wasn't a home. It was a museum, a sterile, untouchable place. Sarah looked up at him, her gray eyes wide with a new kind of fear. We'll get it dirty," she whispered. "It's just a floor," Mark said, though the words felt hollow. He was a man who liked clean floors. He was a man who needed order. They stood there, a frozen triangle of awkwardness, until Mark, realizing he had to break the spell, said, "I have to let my partner out. He's been cooped up." He opened the back door, and Zeus, sensing he was off duty, trotted in. Sarah instantly stiffened, grabbing Leo's arm and pulling him behind her. "It's okay," Mark said quickly. "This is his house too. He's not working now. He's just Zeus." Zeus, a creature of brilliant instinct, seemed to understand everything. He saw the 2 small, terrified humans. He saw his handler, tense and uncertain. He did not go to Mark. He did not go to the children. He walked calmly to a worn basket in the corner of the kitchen, nosed around for a moment, and pulled out a blue, slobber-covered, half-deflated rubber ball. He trotted over and dropped it, with a soft plop, directly at Leo's feet. Leo, who had not made a voluntary movement since the alley, stared at the ball. He stared at the giant, panting dog. Zeus sat, his tail thumping softly against the hardwood, his tongue lolling in a friendly, stupid dog grin. He was no longer a K9. He was a playmate. Leo's gaze flickered to Mark, asking for permission. Mark nodded, a lump forming in his throat. It's his ball. I think he wants you to throw it. Leo didn't throw it. He didn't even pick it up. But he did, very slowly, reach out one small, chapped finger and poke it. The ball squeaked. A tiny, startled sound, half sob, half laugh, escaped Leo's lips. It was the first sound of childhood Mark had heard from either of them. Mark let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Okay," he said, his voice thick. Let me show you your room." He led them down the hall, past his own closed door, past the other door, the one he never opened, to the guest room. It was clean. It was tidy. It had a queen-size bed with a blue comforter. "This is yours," he said. "For now. No one will bother you." He left them there. They didn't enter the room, just stood in the doorway, staring at the bed as if it were a complex, dangerous machine. Mark walked back to the kitchen, picked up his phone, and dialed the PICU. As he waited, he slumped against his clean counter, a man completely adrift. The silence of his house was gone. It had been shattered, replaced by the terrifying, fragile sound of a squeaky blue ball, and a future he had never in a million years asked for. The call from the PICU was a lifeline of clipped, professional jargon. Officer Mark Brennan stood in the gleaming Shillent kitchen of his home, the phone pressed hard against his ear. Mia was stable, but critical. The pneumonia was a vicious, insidious thief, and it was holding the one-year-old's life in a fragile balance. He hung up, the silence of the house rushing back in, heavier and more complex than it had been 2 hours ago. He was no longer just a man grieving in an empty home. He was a guardian. He turned. Sarah and Leo hadn't moved from the guest room doorway. They stood side by side, a two-person defensive line, staring at the clean bed as if it were a trap. The baby. Sarah's voice was a dry rasp. "Mia? Is she?" "She's fighting," Mark said, his voice softer than he intended. She's in a good place, the best place, with doctors." He cleared his throat, forcing himself into a new, unfamiliar role. Are you hungry?" They both stared at him, unblinking. It was a stupid question. They were skeletons. I'll make something," he said awkwardly. He was a cop. He lived on black coffee and protein bars. He opened his refrigerator, its clean white light illuminating eggs, a half-empty bottle of ketchup, and a single, sad-looking beer. Eggs. He could do eggs. As he moved, reaching for a pan in the cabinet above his head, his sudden motion caused Sarah to flinch violently, her hands flying up to protect her face. Leo, seeing his sister's reaction, dove behind her legs. Mark froze, his hands still in the air. The echo of his wife, Emily, laughing in this same kitchen. "You're too big, Mark. You move like a bear," flashed through his mind. A painful, bittersweet memory. But Sarah's flinch wasn't because he was big. It was because she was terrified. He slowly, deliberately lowered his arm. "I'm just getting a pan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For the eggs, I won't ever. I'm just getting the pan." Sarah slowly lowered her arms, her face burning with a hot, embarrassed shame. She hated that she'd flinched. She hated him for seeing it, but she didn't move from her spot. Mark cooked the eggs in silence, the scrape of the spatula on the non-stick pan the only sound. He put 3 plates on the clean table. He poured 3 glasses of water. He slid the scrambled eggs onto each plate. They looked yellow and fluffy. He placed one in front of the chair for Leo, one for Sarah, and sat down at his own. Zeus, sensing food, trotted over and lay his head on Mark's knee, his brown eyes hopeful. It's just eggs," Mark said. Leo looked at Sarah. Sarah, after a long, agonizing minute, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Leo scrambled into the chair and began to eat, his small, dirty fingers stuffing the food into his mouth. Sarah was more methodical. She ate half of her portion, her eyes darting around the room, cataloging exits, windows, weapons. Then, when she thought Mark was distracted by patting Zeus, she quickly, expertly, scraped the other half of her eggs, and most of Leo's leftovers, into a napkin, folded it into a tight, greasy square, and slipped it into the pocket of her oversized scrub pants. Mark saw it. He saw it all. He saw the animal instinct to hoard, the profound, deep-seated terror that this food, This warmth was temporary. He said nothing. He just got up, cleared his own plate, and pretended he hadn't seen a thing. That first night was a war of attrition. Mark gave them the guest room. He laid out 2 new in-package t-shirts he'd never worn and a pair of gym shorts. "You can sleep here. The bathroom is there. I'll be right outside." He didn't go to his own room, the room with the king-size bed and the lingering scent of his wife's perfume. He took the couch. He lay in the dark, his service weapon secured, his phone on his chest, listening. He listened to the whispers. He listened to the 2 of them, not in the bed, but on the floor, dragging the comforter down to make a nest against the wall, a defensible position. He heard Sarah whisper shouting at Leo to "Be quiet," and he heard Leo's muffled sobs. He heard them, finally, at 3 a.m., fall into an exhausted, twitching sleep. He did not sleep at all. The next day, he knew he couldn't leave them. He called his watch commander, a man named Sergeant Mike Davies, a grizzled veteran who had been Mark's training officer. "Brennan, I heard you went 1097, arrived on scene, at the hospital." Davies' voice crackled over the phone. "Talk to me." "Mike, it's complicated," Mark said, pacing his kitchen, watching Sarah and Leo watch him. "The kids from the alley. CPS was going to split them. I took them." The silence on the other end was absolute. "You what?" "I have a 72-hour hold. Judge's order. I'm taking a personal day, or 3. "Mark," Davies' voice was low, serious. "You know the rules. You get involved. This isn't a stray dog, man. This is a case. You can't be primary officer and guardian. It's a conflict." "Then I'm not the primary officer," Mark said. "Take me off it. Assign it to someone else. I gotta go." He hung up, knowing he'd just detonated a grenade in his professional life. He had to see Mia, and he couldn't leave them. So he packed them both back into his SUV, drove to the hospital, and led them up to the sterile, terrifying silence of the PICU. Sarah and Leo were too small to see over the high walls of Mia's incubator. The baby herself was a tiny, pale thing, lost in a nest of tubes and blinking lights. Mark stood, his large hands useless at his sides. Sarah just pressed her forehead against the plastic, her breath fogging it. You gotta wake up," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Mia, you can't leave us too." While Sarah and Leo were mesmerized, Mark stepped out and did the only thing he knew how to do. He became a cop. He had the mother's name from Henderson, Jessica Price. He sat in a cafeteria alcove and used his department-issued laptop. He ran her name, Jessica Price, 28, deceased, a long, sad history of possession, solicitation, petty theft. And then he saw the connection. A name that appeared on 3 separate domestic disturbance calls, all of which were unfounded or victim recanted. Vincent Vince Rell. Mark clicked the name. A mugshot instantly filled his screen, and his blood went cold. Vince Rell, 34, was a man whose arrogance was etched into his features. He had sharp, angular cheekbones, a jawline that might have been handsome if not for the unkempt, greasy beard, and cold, dead eyes. A spiderweb tattoo crawled up his neck from under his collar, but it was the rap sheet that made Mark's stomach tighten. Assault, battery, intimidation of a witness, and, most recently, a charge that was pending, aggravated assault on a minor, his own minor son from a previous relationship. This was the monster. This was the man Sarah had been running from. This wasn't about poverty. This was about survival. He drove them back home, the information a lead weight in his gut. He was no longer just a guardian, he was a protector. He stopped at a Target on the way, the first time he had set foot in one in years. He walked through the aisles in a daze, his uniform drawing stares, as he loaded a cart with jeans for a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old, with sneakers, with juice boxes, with a 200-pack of crayons. Back at the house, he dumped the crayons on the clean kitchen table. "Go ahead," he said. Sarah looked at him, suspicious. "Why are you buying us stuff?" "Because," Mark said, his voice rough, "your shoes were falling apart, and kids need crayons." It was that afternoon, while Mark was on the phone in his home office, arguing with a health insurance liaison for Mia's care, that Leo approached. He tugged, gently, on the hem of Mark's off-duty shirt. Mark turned, annoyed, then his expression softened. "What's up, bud?" Leo didn't speak. He just held up a piece of paper. Mark took it. It was a drawing. It was drawn with a heavy, forceful hand. It was a picture of a house, a simple square brick house. Outside the house was a giant, smiling, sable-colored dog with a blue ball. And next to the dog stood a man, a stick figure so tall his head almost touched the top of the paper, drawn entirely in blue crayon. But it was the hands that stopped Mark's breath. The tall blue man was holding two much smaller hands, a small girl on one side, a small boy on the other. And in the sky, above the house, Leo had drawn a tiny, smiling baby. Mark stared at the drawing, the world narrowing to that single piece of paper. This was not a house. This was a home. This was safety. This was what Leo saw. He looked over at Sarah, who was watching him, her face pale. She had seen the drawing. She looked at Mark, and her eyes, for the first time, were not filled with hate or suspicion. They were just lost. She sat down at the kitchen table, her small body finally slumping, the fight draining out of her. She put her head down on her arms. She didn't cry, she just stopped. The weight of being the protector, the mother, the warrior. She had finally set it down, if only for a moment. Mark looked at the drawing, at the children, at the quiet chaos of his new life, and knew with absolute certainty that he was in a fight for all of them. The 72-hour emergency hold expired with the finality of a gavel strike. Officer Mark Brennan found himself not in his familiar, armor-plated world of patrol cars and K-9 units, but in a sterile, beige room in the Denver Juvenile and Family Courthouse. He was out of uniform, a deliberate choice, wearing his only suit, a dark gray wool that felt stiff and alien. He looked like what he was, a cop playing a role, his large frame making the civilian clothes seem inadequate. Across from him sat Sarah and Leo, scrubbed clean, dressed in the new, stiff clothes from Target, looking like two tiny, silent witnesses. Leo's new sneakers, bright white and flashing with red lights, seemed obscenely cheerful in the somber room. They were not alone. Mr. Henderson, the weary CPS worker, was there, his expression one of profound resignation. Beside him sat a new player, a sharp-looking woman in her late 20s with a severe black bob and glasses. "This is Ms. Wells," Henderson had muttered. "She's the guardian ad litem, the court-appointed attorney for the children." Ms. Wells had regarded Mark with the piercing, skeptical gaze of an idealist who had seen too many broken systems. She did not trust a K-9 cop's sudden, messy lurch into humanitarianism. The final piece was the judge. Her name was Alani Torres, a woman in her 60s with intelligent obsidian eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was, Mark realized, the judge Henderson had woken up 3 nights ago. She did not look pleased to be back. "Officer Brennan," she began, her voice a low, clear bell. "I have read your report. I have read Mr. Henderson's report. And I have read the file you, improperly, I might add, compiled on one Mr. Vincent Rell." Mark didn't flinch. "I am faced with a choice," the judge continued, "to place these children in the state's foster system, which is, as we all know, overburdened, or to continue this irregular arrangement." "Your Honor," Ms. Wells spoke, her voice crisp, "my clients have been through significant trauma. While Officer Brennan's actions were commendable, his home is not a certified foster environment. He is a single, active-duty male. He is, frankly, the definition of irregular. The state can provide trained, licensed—" "No!" The voice was Sarah's. It was small, but it cut through the legal jargon like a shard of glass. Everyone stopped. Sarah was on her feet, her small hands balled into fists. "No, we're not going. You're not splitting us up. He yelled at you," she said, pointing a finger at Henderson, who actually shrank in his seat. He bought us crayons. We're not going." Judge Torres watched this outburst, her expression unreadable. She looked at the file on her desk, the one detailing Vince Rell's history of aggravated assault. "A shelter is not a home, Ms. Wells, and a system is not a family, but a cop's house is not a long-term solution, officer." She leaned forward. "I'm giving you an extension, 30 days, but it comes with conditions. You will file for full temporary guardianship. You will submit to a home study, and you will," she fixed him with a stare, "provide these children with a life, not a safe house. Get them into school. Show me normalcy. Show me stability. Or in 30 days, Ms. Wells gets her wish. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mark said, the words tasting like victory and terror. The next morning, he did just that. He stood in the sterile, overheated main office of Park Hill Elementary, the local school. Sarah and Leo stood behind him, clutching each other's hands. He was explaining the situation to the school registrar, a flustered, kind-eyed woman named Mrs. Petrov, who was trying to reconcile the large, armed-by-default man in front of her with the two silent, ghost-like children. "Emergency guardianship," Mark said, pushing the court order, still warm from the printer, across her desk. "They'll need to start immediately." "Of course, officer," she murmured, her eyes softening as she looked at Leo. "We'll get them settled in. Breakfast is in 10 minutes. But Sarah pulled back, her body a small, rigid column of no. "We can't," she whispered urgently to Mark, tugging his sleeve. "A school. It's a dot. It's a place they write your name down. It's how he finds you." Mark knelt, his knees cracking. He was in his uniform, having come straight from the courthouse to the school. He put his hands on her shoulders. "Sarah, look at me. This is how we win. Remember? The judge? We have to show her we're normal. Normal kids go to school. This," he said, tapping the school's front door, "is our proof. This is how we fight." He wasn't just talking about the judge, he was talking about Vince. He was hiding them in plain sight. Sarah stared at him, her 10-year-old mind processing a strategy of adult warfare. She finally, reluctantly, nodded. For 2 days, a fragile, terrifying normalcy settled in. Mark would drop them off, his stomach in a knot. He would watch them, two small figures, walk into the large brick building. Then he would go to the hospital, sit by Mia's incubator. She was still critical, still fighting. And then he would go to work, his mind a million miles away, his hand constantly checking his phone. The call came on the 3rd day. He was at the PICU, watching Mia's tiny chest rise and fall, when his phone buzzed. Park Hill Elementary. His heart stopped. He was out of the room and answering before the second ring. "This is Brennan. Officer Brennan, this is Mrs. Petrov from the school. I don't want to alarm you, but you need to come, now. Sarah, she's had an episode. She's in the nurse's office with Leo. They're safe. Just, please come." He didn't remember the drive. He didn't remember parking or bursting through the front doors, his K9 unit left running in a fire lane. He found them in the nurse's office. Sarah was under a small desk, her arms wrapped around Leo, her body shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. She was hyperventilating, making small animal sounds of terror. Sarah, I'm here," Mark said, dropping to his knees. "He was here," she gasped, her eyes wild, her fingernails digging into Leo's arm. "He was here." "Who, honey? Who was here?" The nurse, a young woman with a kind face, asked gently. The ghost," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. Mark's blood turned to ice. He got the story out of them in ragged, terrified pieces. It was outdoor recess. Sarah and Leo were by the fence, watching the other kids, too scared to play. And a man had walked up to the chain link, his hands in his pockets. It was Vince. Greasy beard, spiderweb tattoo, and the same dead, cold eyes from the mugshot. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't threatened. He had smiled. "Hey there, Leo boy," he'd cooed, his voice a low, friendly rasp, like he was calling a dog. "Hey there, little man. Remember me? I'm your uncle. Got something for you. Got some candy." He'd rattled a box in his pocket. Leo, innocent and starved for kindness, had taken a step toward the fence. But Sarah had seen him. She had reacted with the pure, unthinking violence of a mother bear. She had grabbed Leo by the collar, dragging him backward so hard he fell. She had stood in front of him and screamed, a sound so primal and full of rage that the playground monitor, a young woman in a yellow vest, had blown her whistle and come running. By the time the monitor reached the fence, Vince Rell was gone, vanished. A ghost, just as Leo had said. "It's my fault," Sarah was sobbing now, rocking Leo under the desk. "It's my fault. I went to school. I put us on the dot. I told him where we were. It's my fault he found us." "No." Mark's voice was a low, dangerous growl. He reached under the desk, not grabbing, just offering his hand. "No, it is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. You were brave." He waited. After a long minute, her small, shaking hand crept into his massive one. He gently pulled them out. He scooped Leo into one arm, grabbed Sarah's hand with the other, and stood up. He looked at the nurse. They're checking out. Indefinitely. He walked them out of the school, past the staring children, past Mrs. Petrov's worried face. He buckled them into his SUV, Zeus whining in concern from the back. The car was silent, filled only with the sound of Sarah's ragged, hitching breaths. The experiment was over. Normalcy had failed. He was driving them home, but he knew it wasn't a home. It was a target. He picked up his phone. He didn't call the judge. He didn't call Henderson. He called his sergeant. "Mike," he said, his voice flat and cold as steel. "It's Mark. He's here, the ghost. He's in my city, and he just tried to take my kids." The phone line crackled, but the silence from Sergeant Mike Davies' end was louder. Officer Mark Brennan was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror with a frantic, practiced rhythm. The K-9 unit was a sanctuary, but it felt like a fishbowl. Sarah and Leo were two small, terrified statues in the back, their breath fogging the side windows. "Mark!" Sergeant Davies' voice finally came through, a low growl of disbelief and fury. "What the hell did you just say?" "I said he tried to take them," Mark repeated, his voice a flat, cold monotone as he took a sharp, unsignaled left. "Vince Rell, at the school. He's here. He's hunting them." "He tried to take your kids?" Davies barked. "They are not." "Damn it, Brennan. You're compromised. You're in it. You're the target and the victim. They are not a case, Mike," Mark roared, the first crack in his professional facade. "They're just kids." Another beat of charged silence. Davies sighed, the sound like gravel rolling downhill. The cop was gone. The sergeant was back. Okay, you're right. He's not a ghost. He's a predator, and we're going to put him down." The shift in tone was immediate. "Where are you?" Mark told him the cross street. No, you are not going home. Your house is a target. You are not going to the precinct. It's a circus. You are going to Safe House Delta. You know the one. Top floor apartment, 12C, the steel door. Go, now. I'll have a black and white parked out front, but make it discreet. And Mark, lose anyone who might be on you." "Copy," Mark said. He spent the next 20 minutes driving like a man possessed, taking alleys, making 3 consecutive right turns, doubling back, his eyes burning into the mirror. He saw nothing. No beat-up sedan. No ghost. Vince Rell, it seemed, had vanished back into the storm. Safe House Delta was a monument to bureaucratic anonymity. A 20-story beige apartment building in a nondescript neighborhood. Its only redeeming feature was that it was utterly forgettable. Mark parked, grabbed the go bag from his trunk, and hustled the kids inside. Zeus now on a short tactical leash, his head swiveling, sensing the acute vibrating tension in his handler. Apartment 12C had a reinforced steel door and cheap functional furniture. It was sterile. It was safe. Mark double-locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and finally, for the first time in an hour, let out a breath. We're safe here," he said, mostly to himself. Sarah and Leo didn't seem convinced. They huddled by the window, staring down at the city lights, which were just blurred smudges through the falling snow. Zeus, however, was not convinced. The dog did not relax. He did not lie down. He began a low, almost inaudible whine, pacing the small perimeter of the living room, his claws click-click-clicking on the cheap laminate floor. "What is it, boy?" Mark whispered, his hand going to the grip of his service weapon. "What do you smell?" The dog just whined, his focus on the door. Mark's phone buzzed, vibrating violently on the cheap particle board table. He snatched it. It was Mike. "Mark!" Davies' voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by something cold, something that sounded like fear. "Mike, we're in," Mark said. "The dog's... he's antsy, but the location is secure." "Mark, shut up and listen to me," Mike said, his voice a rapid-fire staccato. "We had him wrong. We had him all wrong." "What are you talking about? He's a domestic abuser, a ghost with a..." "He's not a ghost," Mike cut him off. "That's why he was hard to find. He's a transporter. I ran Rel's name through the Joint Task Force database. We just got a hit back from the feds, from the Trafficking in Persons unit." Mark felt the blood drain from his face, a cold, heavy sensation that started in his chest and settled in his feet. Trafficking? Vince Rell isn't just a girlfriend beater, Mark. He's a mid-level player in a ring that moves people, mostly kids, south, over the border. That's why his previous assault on a minor was pending. The victim vanished before he could testify. Rell isn't here because he gives a damn about Jessica Price's memory. He's not here for a $1,000 insurance policy. He's here because those kids, Mark, their product. He wasn't trying to abduct Leo, he was trying to collect him. The plot twist landed in the sterile room with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a custody fight. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This was a federal case. This was a man who didn't just hurt kids, he sold them. Mark's eyes snapped to Sarah and Leo, two small, priceless assets huddled by the window. And as that realization crystallized, Zeus stopped pacing. The dog went rigid, his hackles rising in a solid, unbroken line from his neck to his tail. He stared at the steel door, and he let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated the very air in the room. "Mike," Mark whispered into the phone, his blood turning to ice. "Mike, he's here." "What? That's impossible. It's a secure—" "He's here! The dog's got him! He's at the door!" Mark had his weapon drawn, pushing Sarah and Leo behind him toward the small, dark kitchen. "Get back! Now!" Then came the sound. Not a knock, not a kick. A soft, casual tap-tap-tap on the steel. "Officer Brennan?" The voice was oily, friendly, muffled by the door. "Mark? Can I call you Mark? I know you're in there. I saw you park. You missed your tail light, by the way. It's out." Vince Rell was mocking him. He had followed him. Mark, rattled by the school, blinded by his panic, had missed a tail. He had led the monster right to them. "Mark, I just want to talk. We got off on the wrong foot. This is just a misunderstanding about my family. Open up. I've got an officer in distress," Mark roared into the phone. "Safe House Delta, 12C. He is on the door. Send everybody." The casual tapping stopped. "Okay," Vince's voice sighed. All friendliness gone. "Guess we're doing this the hard way." There was a thud, a grunt, and the sound of a heavy object hitting the steel. A crowbar. The lock was holding, but the frame was splintering. "Get in the bathroom! Lock the door!" Mark yelled at Sarah. He pointed his weapon, a standard-issue Sig Sauer, at the door, his hands steady, his heart a cold, hard knot. The door splintered again. A crack appeared. Zeus was at his side, barking, a deep, furious, terrifying sound. "This is your last chance, cop," Vince yelled from the hallway. "Give me the kids, and I'll let you live." "Go to hell," Mark yelled back. The door burst open, not from the lock, but from the frame itself, which tore from the cheap drywall. Vince Rell stood there, his face a mask of sweat and desperate fury. He was exactly as his mugshot depicted. Cold, dead eyes, spiderweb tattoo, and a crowbar in his hand. He saw Mark. He saw the gun. He didn't care. His eyes darted past Mark, to the kitchen, where Sarah and Leo were frozen in terror. He saw his product. He smiled. "There they are." He took a step. "Zeus! Fast! Attack!" The command was the only one Mark gave. Zeus, who had been waiting for that single word his entire life, exploded. He was not a dog. He was a 90-pound missile of fur and teeth and righteous fury. He hit Vince low, at the knees, the impact echoing like a bat hitting a tree. Vince screamed, a high-pitched surprise sound, as he tumbled backward into the hallway. The crowbar clattered to the floor. Before Vince could even process what had happened, Zeus was on him, his jaws clamped vice-like around the man's forearm, shaking his head, the deep animalistic growl of a predator who had found his prey. Mark was on him a second later, his knee on Vince's chest, his gun to the man's head. "Don't move a muscle." Vince just lay there, his face white with pain and shock, staring at the dog that was still attached to his arm. The hallway filled with the sound of running boots, of shouting. Mike Davies, having apparently driven 100 mirar, was the first one through the door, his own gun drawn, followed by two more TAC officers. They took in the scene, the splintered door, the man on the ground, the K9 attached to his arm, and Mark Brennan, standing guard over the two small children who were peeking, wide-eyed, from the kitchen. Mike holstered his weapon. "Well, Brennan," he said, breathing hard, "you're a hell of a liability, but you're not wrong." He looked at the man on the floor. "Get him up, get him out, and someone get that dog a steak." Mark didn't move. He just stood, his gun still pointed, until the officers had hauled Vince Rell to his feet and dragged him, bleeding and cursing, down the hall. Only then did he holster his weapon. His hands were shaking. He turned, slowly, and looked at Sarah and Leo. They weren't crying. They were just staring, at him, at the dog. Zeus trotted back in, his muzzle clean, and sat at Mark's feet, panting, his tail giving one, single, satisfied thump. "It's over," Mark said, the words sounding hollow and strange. "He's gone. The ghost is gone." The hallway of Safe House Delta was a sudden, violent swarm of blue. The aftermath of the fight was louder than the fight itself. Officers shouting into radios, the crackle of comms, the heavy thud of boots on the laminate floor as the TAC team cleared the adjacent apartments. Vincent Rell was gone, a bleeding, cursing ghost finally dragged into the light, leaving behind only a splintered doorframe and the lingering stench of his sweat. Officer Mark Brennan stood in the breach, his Sig Sauer finally, slowly, lowered to his side, his body a single rigid block of adrenaline. He was no longer shaking. He was perfectly, terrifyingly still. Sergeant Mike Davies was the last one in the room, his grizzled face pale. He walked past the splintered wood, his eyes landing first on Mark, then on the two small children huddled in the kitchen doorway, and finally on Zeus, who was sitting at Mark's feet, panting lightly, his tail thumping once on the floor, as if to say, "Job done." Davies let out a long, slow breath. "Well, Brennan," he grunted, his voice rough, "you're a damn magnet, you know that? You couldn't just find a stray cat." He followed me," Mark said, his voice sounding distant, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. "Yeah, he did," Mike said, "and now he's in a federal transport, and his entire ring is about to be rolled up from here to Juarez. You didn't just catch a ghost, Mark. You just decapitated a dragon." He put a heavy, comforting hand on Mark's shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. "Go home. I'll handle the paperwork. This is my... I can't..." Mark gestured at the splintered door, the chaos. "No," Mike said, his voice suddenly firm. "I mean home. Your house. Take your kids. Go home. We'll have a cruiser sit on your street for a week, just in case. But he's gone. It's over. Go." Mark finally holstered his weapon. The click of the retention strap was the loudest sound he'd ever heard. He turned, slowly, and looked at the children. Sarah and Leo hadn't moved. They were just watching him, their faces pale, their eyes a matched set of gray, wide with a terror that had not yet subsided. It's over," Mark said, echoing his words from before, but this time he was saying them to the kids. "The ghost is gone." He held out his hand. The weeks that followed were a different kind of war, a war of paperwork, hospital corridors, and quiet, terrifying nights. The first victory was silent and medical. Mark had taken his mandatory leave, a critical incident designation, which he spent not at a department shrink, but in a plastic chair in the Denver General PICU. He sat there for 3 days straight, a large, uniformed man in a room full of sub-beeping machines, holding a hand so small it was almost translucent. On the third day, Mia's doctor, Dr. Aries, had come in, looked at the readouts, and smiled. "Well, officer," he said, "I don't know what you're doing, but..." Her fever broke. The antibiotics are winning. 2 weeks later, Marky, his hands shaking far more than they had when facing Vince, signed the discharge papers. He carried Mia out of the hospital, a tiny 5-pound warrior who smelled of formula and antiseptic, and took her home. The second victory was legal. Vince Rell, faced with a mountain of federal trafficking evidence and the testimony of a K-9 officer, had no ghost of a chance. His trial was a formality, a footnote. He was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in a federal supermax, a sentence that meant he would die in a concrete box. The ghost was well and truly buried. The final battle was the most terrifying. It was back in Judge Alani Torres' courtroom, 6 months after the night in the alley. The room was the same beige, but the air was different. It was warmer. Mark stood at the table, this time in his dress uniform, his hat in his hand. Sarah, now 11, sat in the front row, her hair brushed and pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing a new dress. Leo, 6, sat beside her, his feet, in their red light-up sneakers, kicking the bench in a rhythm of nervous energy. And in the very back, Sergeant Mike Davies sat with a sleeping Mia in his arms, the grizzled veteran somehow a natural at rocking a baby. Ms. Wells, the guardian ad litem, the sharp-eyed woman who had been so skeptical, was the first to speak. She stood, her black bob immaculate. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear, 6 months ago, I stood in this room and argued for the system. I argued for procedure. She turned and looked at Mark. I was wrong. The system would have failed these children. What Officer Brennan did was not irregular. It was essential. I have conducted the home study. I have spoken to the children. I have never, in my career, seen a bond so profound, forged so quickly. I am not here to ask the court to place them. I am here to beg the court to recognize the family that already exists. Judge Torres looked over the top of her glasses, first at Ms. Wells, then at the children, and finally at Mark. A very small, very real smile touched the corners of her mouth. Officer Brennan, she said, her voice no longer stern but soft. You were sworn to serve and protect. It seems, in the case of these children, you took that oath to its most literal and most beautiful conclusion. She lifted her gavel. In the matter of the Price children, I find that their best interest, their only interest, is served by remaining in the care of the man who saved their lives. I am hereby terminating the parental rights of the deceased and of the incarcerated Mr. Rell. I am granting full, permanent, and sole custody to Officer Mark Brennan. She banged the gavel, the sound of period on the end of their old life. Congratulations, Dad. 1 year later, the snow was just a memory. It was a bright, flawless July day. The sky over Denver was a painful, aching blue, and the Rockies stood etched against the horizon. In a sprawling, sun-drenched patch of Washington Park, a 95-pound, sable-colored German shepherd was in a dead sprint, his ears back, his eyes locked on a red frisbee. I got him! I got him! Yelled Leo, now 6, his voice no longer a whisper, but a confident shout. He was running, his new sneakers pounding the grass. No way, Leo! Zeus loves me more! Sarah, 11, yelled laughing as she cut him off, her ponytail flying. She was no longer a small, fierce mother warrior. She was just a kid, her face bright with sun and joy, arguing with her brother. On a nearby blanket, Mark Brennan, 30 out of uniform, wearing a faded t-shirt and shorts, watched them. He was no longer the hollowed-out cop. He was just a man, watching his kids play. He bounced a giggling, chubby 2-year-old on his knee. Mia, her lungs now strong, her face round and healthy, grabbed his nose. Stop, you monster! He laughed, rolling her onto the blanket and tickling her. Zeus, having retrieved the frisbee, trotted back, not to the kids, but to Mark. He was retired. His canine days were over, traded for a life of belly rubs and stolen scraps. He dropped the slobbery disc on Mia's head and licked her face. Zeus! Gross! Sarah shrieked, collapsing on the blanket. Mark looked around, at his daughter, his son, his baby, his dog. He looked at the perfect blue sky. He remembered that night in the alley, the suffocating snow, the feeling of absolute crushing despair. He remembered his old life, the house that had been so quiet, so clean, so empty. That night, he drove them home, the car filled with the smell of cut grass, sunscreen, and sticky ice cream. The house on Quiet Hill was no longer quiet. It was a beautiful, chaotic mess. Crayons were scattered on the kitchen table. Leo's drawing, the one of the tall blue man, was framed on the wall. Tiny, light-up sneakers were blinking by the door. As Mark unlocked it, Mia, who was just learning to talk, pointed at him. "Dada!" she yelled, her voice a joyful trumpet. Mark smiled, scooping her up. The ghosts were gone. The silence was broken. He was home. Mark's story reminds us that family isn't always blood. It's the person who finds us in our darkest storm. It's who stays, who fights, and who sees our worth when we cannot. Do you believe in miracles? God didn't send a winged angel to save Sarah, Leo, and Mia. He sent a broken police officer, Mark, and his loyal K9, Zeus. He used Mark's past pain to forge the strength to protect their future. That is how miracles often work. In our daily lives, we all have the chance to be a Mark or a Zeus for someone. A miracle is when we choose not to walk away, when we share our warmth and stand up for the vulnerable. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Comment below about a protector you've known in your life. And please subscribe to The Rescue Relay for more stories of hope. May God bless all of you watching, and may He protect you and your families, just as this new family was protected. Thank you for listening.